The city was a restless machine that never slowed, its streets buzzing with engines, chatter, footsteps, and the dull rhythm of lives caught in an endless loop of survival, and in the heart of that chaos on a gray October afternoon, the rain came down in cold sheets, dripping from neon signs and slicking the cracked sidewalks where people rushed with their collars pulled high and umbrellas angled like shields against the storm, each soul desperate to reach the next destination without delay. Without acknowledgement of the humanity brushing past them, and that was why no one noticed, no one cared to notice. The old woman sitting hunched at the base of a flickering lamppost, her coat threadbare, her shoes split at the seams, her thin hands trembling around a faded handbag as tears streamed down the creases of her face and mingled with the rainwater running down her cheeks, making it impossible to tell which drops belonged to sorrow and which to the storm, her sobs barely audible above the honking cars and hurried conversations, yet loud enough to echo in the ears of anyone who might have dared to stop, though none did, not the businessman whose wristwatch glinted as he glanced at it impatiently, not the young mother yanking her child along with whispered words of "Don't look, just keep walking," not the group of college boys who laughed too loudly as they passed by, one of them muttering something cruel about "crazy homeless people," as if her existence were a punchline rather than a plea, and even the older woman carrying groceries quickened her pace, her eyes flicking briefly toward the figure on the ground before darting away, as though compassion were too heavy a burden to carry in addition to her paper bags, so the old woman wept alone, invisible, abandoned not only by her family and her home but by the world itself, her shoulders shaking as she whispered the same sentence under her breath again and again, "Why did he leave me? Why did he leave me?" Until her voice cracked into silence, her tears replaced by the hollow rhythm of despair, and perhaps she might have faded into nothing more than another forgotten figure on a rain-drenched street corner, another casualty of a society too busy to care, if not for a 17-year-old black teen named Marcus Carter, who walked that very street at that very hour, his sneakers squishing against the wet pavement, his hood pulled up against the downpour, his body exhausted from a long shift at the grocery store where he had bagged vegetables, mopped spills, and smiled through the patronizing glares of customers who saw him only as another kid with dark skin and little future, and though his paycheck was meager and his hands ached, he carried with him a small paper bag that held his dinner, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a bottle of water. Because his mother had told him to save every penny for bills, and Marcus, despite his youth, knew the weight of responsibility, the heavy pull of poverty that shaped every decision he made, but still, as tired as he was, there was something in him that refused to harden, something that his late grandmother used to call the spark, the ability to feel when others were hurting, the ability to see what others ignored. And so when Marcus slowed his stride and glanced toward the lamppost, his eyes locking on the old woman's trembling figure, something inside him stirred, and though instinct told him to keep moving like everyone else, for stopping meant being late, being cold, being vulnerable, his feet betrayed him, and he found himself pausing, staring, the storm soaking his hoodie as he wrestled with the choice that everyone else had already made to walk away, until finally he muttered to himself, "Nah, can't leave her like this," and before he could talk himself out of it he stepped toward her, lowering himself into a crouch so that his eyes were level with hers, his voice soft but steady as he asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And at first she flinched, startled that someone had spoken to her, her cloudy eyes wide with fear as if expecting ridicule or cruelty, but then she saw the concern etched on his young face, the sincerity in his tone, and her lips quivered before she whispered hoarsely, "No. No, I'm not okay," and the words spilled out of her like a flood, raw and broken, as she told him her name was Eleanor, that her only son had abandoned her after taking the last of her savings, that her landlord had thrown her out, that she had nowhere to go and nothing to eat, her voice cracking as she admitted she hadn't tasted real food in 2 days. And Marcus felt a sharp ache in his chest because he remembered nights when his own mother had skipped meals so he could eat, remembered the way she cried quietly over bills she couldn't pay, and though he had so little himself, though he was barely scraping by, he knew in that moment that he couldn't walk away, that he couldn't be like the others who had turned their heads, so he reached into his paper bag and pulled out the sandwich, pressing it into her frail hands despite her protests, saying firmly, "Please, you need this more than I do." And when she clutched it with trembling fingers and took the first desperate bite, tears welled again in her eyes, not of despair this time but of gratitude, and Marcus, moved by something deeper than reason, pulled out the crumpled bills he had been saving for bus fare and tucked them gently into her handbag, promising quietly, "I'll help you, I don't know how yet, but I'll help." And though he had no plan, no roadmap, something about the promise felt real, as though fate had drawn him to that lamppost at that moment. And when he stood to help her to her feet, guiding her carefully through the storm to a nearby diner whose neon sign flickered against the rain, he lied to the skeptical manager who eyed her disheveled clothes, saying she was his grandmother and would be treated with respect. And when Eleanor sat down with a plate of warm food steaming in front of her, the look on her face, half relief, half disbelief, seared itself into Marcus's memory, and as she ate she told him stories of her younger days as a teacher, of how she had devoted herself to guiding children who weren't hers because she believed in the power of shaping futures, and Marcus listened intently, something about her voice igniting a spark inside him, and though he didn't know it then, this rainy afternoon would be the beginning of a bond that would reshape his destiny, for in choosing to stop when no one else did, he had opened a door not only for Eleanor's second chance but for his own awakening. And as the storm raged outside the diner window, washing the streets clean, Marcus Carter's life quietly shifted course, setting him on a path where kindness would become strength, and strength would lead him to places he had never dared dream, proving that sometimes the smallest act, pausing to help when the world keeps walking, is enough to change everything.